Pray that the second coming will be soon. Doesn't that tell you something?
Yeah. This talking to me on the ego level, because it's already happened. If I believe that it's already happened, then that's the confusing, that's the paradox right there.
Yes. Yes, that's one of the places I'm talking about.
And then it says, and don't rest with that, use your ears and your eyes and your hands and your feet, which brings you to all kinds of things. You know, when do you put energy into something out there, such as voting, you know?
It is what?
Such as voting or anything like that. I mean,
Well,
none of it really matters because...
It does and it doesn't, honey. You see, you can say it doesn't matter, but if inside it really does, then you better pay attention to that.
So it's my own personal...
That's...
Then, that's
yes.
when it's my hands and feet.
Yes. And how you use. But that's always our challenge, you see, to say, whoops, what does this mean for me? What is the only difference between a saint and a sinner? How you perceive yourself. So you see, to one person, voting could be an absolute waste of time. To another person, it has a totally different meaning. Well, listen to what you're saying, Sam. You'll know what you're creating. You'll know what you're creating an experience of. The way you describe a situation very clearly tells you what you're getting out of it. So when you talk about this person who is totally destitute, what does being destitute mean for you?
Lack.
So that lack must be real. It must be a part of your life.
Yeah.
So your experience is that lack is real.
Is that Sam's or is it the individual's?
Well, if the individual is having that experience, then it's both.
That's an interesting concept, you know. I'm thinking about Emmett Fox's statement that whatever you focus your mental attention on will expand in your life. So if I'm focusing my mental attention on the amount of people who are needy, am I actually creating more of them?
There again, Brian, that's another one of those questions that can only be answered both ways. If you see it from the point of view of the Holy Spirit, no. If you see it from the point of view of the ego, yes.
So these people who are out there drumming up money and things to help others are really coming from the ego, I would imagine.
Maybe
It
not.
might be contributing to the problem, unknowingly.
Well, maybe not. There can be someone who just recognizes that there's just so much lack in the world, so much perception of lack in the world, that they would feel better if they did something to try to give somebody an idea that maybe there's another way. Maybe there's another way for them to see themselves. Maybe if they helped this person spend a night in a hotel rather than in a wet tent, maybe that might give this person an idea that they could do something more for themselves.
So I'm reminded of the statement in the Course that says, seek not to change the world. Seek to change your mind about the world.
And that is changing your mind about the world. Do you understand what I'm saying? That's not trying to change the world. That's trying to change your mind about what the possibilities would be for this person to experience the world. Quite a difference.
So could you say when you're seeing the lack out there, you're on the ego level and you're looking at it from here,
But then when you ask for help, maybe to see it differently, then you are jumping up
Yes,
to hear and asking for help, and so that's where you see it differently.
absolutely.
Okay.
And Sam, if you'll investigate your own inner fears, you will discover that there are forms of lack in your experience that really trouble you. And that's what, when you're seeing a person and you're going through this experience, you go into the store and you stop a moment, and you say, now, what was that all about for me? What was happening in that encounter that would help me let go of my thoughts of lack?
I had this tremendous urge to take them out for dinner or something and just explore much more deeply what transpired in his life. I wanted to figure it all out.
But don't go there.
I did well. My wife is inside the door, and she would be extremely upset, I think, if I did anything like that.
But to stop for a moment and ask what's going on for you. That's the key. That's always the key.
Rather than trying to figure it out yourself.
Yes.
But you didn't mean don't take them out to dinner.
I mean, that's coming to the decision of what the right thing was to do without really finding out what the right thing was to do.
Is there anything wrong?
Our attitude towards somebody else is what we communicate. And if I wanted to communicate the most helpful thing to that person, I would have to know what was going on with them. And I don't. So I have to say to the God Self, show me. Show me how I should be, show me the vision I should be holding now. That would help me see why I feel the way I feel and would help give this person an opportunity to feel differently. Why does it seem to take what we call a disaster for us to awaken? Have you ever wondered about that? Because it does. Certainly. It almost always seems as though we have to hit bottom before we ever start looking or opening our mind to something new. Why is that?
Well, probably because it seems like we have to get to a point where we know for a fact that we can't do anything. We know we can't fix it.
That's exactly right, honey. Exactly right. The ego is so determined to be in charge, to have things made or remade the way it thinks it's going to be happy, safe, and so forth, that it's only when it reaches that point where it says, good Lord, I can't do anything. There's got to be a better way. That we open our mind to that possibility. What does that tell us? How about when we're feeling good, to develop a habit of going to the God Self and saying, is there anything even better than this? Because all of it is just a habit in our thinking. Whether we're trying to wait until it's good or bad, it's just a habit in our thinking. Have you ever just had the feeling, just kind of out of the blue, you were doing something and had the feeling that had happened before? I think we've all had that experience, haven't we? Have you ever wondered what causes that? Or where it comes from? Do you think we've actually literally had that particular thing happen before?
You know, if this is all a play, then it wouldn't surprise me that we had rehearsed this play before we ever came here, and that's what we remember.
I think that's entirely possible, Brian. I also think it's possible that the thoughts are what we're really re-experiencing. And the form that the thoughts are taking probably have been myriad. But what it always tickles me to step back and think is, if that is the same thought that I've had before, when am I going to stop having it? When is it going to go away? And I asked Brother about that once. I said, when am I ever going to wake up from these silly repetition of thoughts? And he said, why do you want to? What do you mean, why do I want to? Because they're annoying. He said, what if they weren't annoying? I said, well, if they weren't annoying, they wouldn't bother me. And he said, then you probably wouldn't have them again, would you? So I try to follow that suggestion now.
You know, that's such a subtle but important point that you bring up, Tom, because, you know, I think we can grasp the idea that if we condemn something within this dream, it holds us here. We're attached to that condemnation. It's an injustice that should be made right before we can leave the story. But it's a lot more subtle when it's just an annoyance. But it holds us here just as much.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the experience that the thought recreates just keeps repeating itself over and over again. The form changes, but the meaning of it is still pretty much the same, over and over and over again. So what is unacceptable? What is unacceptable then within the eyes of, let's say, the Holy Spirit? What would be unacceptable? Anything? Nothing.
To me, nothing would be unacceptable, but that would still require discernment between truth and illusion.
I think, for me, yes, I agree with you. Discernment certainly is necessary for me. But if nothing is unacceptable to the Holy Spirit, then if I am to take what is unacceptable to me to the Holy Spirit, I'm probably going to get a different way to look at it. I'm probably going to be shown how not to let that be upsetting.
In my life, I've only bought 2 houses. And I bought the house, we bought the house that we live in now because we have 14 acres. We're surrounded by cedar trees that are like twice as big as that cedar out there. They're like a couple hundred years old. And there's thousands of them all over, and that's why we moved the house. So, and when I bought the house, the fellow told me who I bought it from said that it won't get logged. And so they're clear cutting, like everything. You know, and I mean, they're not clear cutting our 14 acres, obviously, but the house is 50 yards from where they're clear cutting. And so I was standing there today watching this machine get closer and closer, and because it's one guy is cutting a whole forest, and that's the way they do it now. And I was standing there, you know, asking to see this differently.
I think what you're experiencing, Dennis, is a good example of why the world seems so real to us and why it's so difficult for us to become unattached to it. When you stand there and you say, I really want to see this differently, are you saying that, or are you saying, I want to see a way to make this stop?
I mean, I can't make it stop, so I want to see it differently.
Then what would be acceptable to you in seeing it differently? So there really isn't any way for you to see it differently, is there?
I'm sure there is, I'm just not.
But I mean in that frame of mind.
Yeah, where I'm at right now, there isn't.
Okay, remember we talked about last week your intention about your prayer. So it's like, all right, so how can the outcome be the best for all of us? Like, pray for the outcome to be the best for everybody who's involved in this situation, including the man who's cutting down the trees, including everybody, to go to that place. And also, like, the exaggeration started to get really, before that, it started to get really big in my mind. There's got to be an outcome. Like, what's the best possible outcome for everybody who is involved in it? And it kind of neutralizes me, like quiets me a little bit.
Do you wonder about that yourself, honey, or do you ask?
I ask, I prayed and I was like, may the best possible outcome be for everybody who's involved in this situation. And then of course I take my will back a few minutes later, but I do go to that place of it. And so I was trying to look at, let go.
But what are you trying to let go of?
My control of the outcome.
Good. Now, if you did let go of your control of the outcome, and they cut right up to the front of your house, what would that mean to you? What would that indicate to you?
Well, a feeling of it would evoke a feeling of devastation, a feeling of grief.
Yes. So maybe that is what's really concerning you.
Me not wanting to feel grief.
What would make you feel grief? What would make you feel a sense of loss? What would make you feel vulnerable? Is that what you would really like to be free of?
Yeah.
Or would you just like to be free of people doing bad things?
I would like to be free of people doing bad things. Or free of grief, free of it all, free of trying to, just free inside of myself. That's what I want to do.
Those aren't the same. That's kind of the point I'm trying to bring up. It is not the same thing to say, what I want is to be free of people doing all of these crazy, obnoxious things. And on the other hand, saying, what I want to be free of is my perception of why the world seems to be such a nasty place.
Yeah.
See, of one, you're bound to be a victim. And of the other, now you can learn something. The world and everything that happens in the world is part of our dream. That's what's unfolding as a result of your feelings, Eddie. Your feelings of, wow, grief and loss and all of that. That's what makes the world what it is. So if we really wanted to be free of that, if we really wanted the possibility of a different world, what the Course calls the real world, then we have to change the thoughts that are making that world. And by our condemning everything that's happening that we see now in the world, we're not changing it at all. We're not even changing it when we say, I want to see this differently, unless we are willing to totally surrender our perception of everything, all of the meanings that we have given to what is now happening in the world.
Yeah, that's the hard part.
Oh boy, is that hard part.
I want to live in the woods next to all these old trees.
But what you're discovering, Dennis, is you can't even live in the woods and escape that, you see. It's going to catch up with you wherever you go, because you are the one who is making that world happen. I'd like to have us try something here for a moment, because Dennis, you brought us all to a pretty raw edge there just a few moments ago. We all could relate to our frustration of not being able to control the world. Every one of us has had that experience in some form or another, and will continue to have. It's inevitable. Because the world is made to be a contradiction. It literally is made to be a contradiction, because the mind that has made it is split within itself. So just for a moment, try to bring yourself to the place of saying, would I rather have the experience of complete harmony, of complete peace that comes with my surrender of my perception totally, without any expectations? Would I rather have that, or would I rather control the environment that I now see? Because those are really our two options. We're either going to control it and it's all going to turn out the way we think it ought to, or we're going to let it go and say, my goodness, maybe there's something even better than that. I have reached an age with a physical condition that forces me to look at those kinds of choices. And I feel very grateful at times, that I am able to see them from a different perspective. Because unless I catch myself, I can come to the edge of saying, oh my God, I don't want to be without the person that I love so much. I don't want this, I don't want that, and I can feel all of my controls beginning to slip away. And it's like, for a moment, it's like panic. Panic. What's going to happen? But you see, we all have the opportunity before we get there, hopefully, of recognizing that the principle of creating our own experience of a world is not going to change. But we have to be willing, we have to be willing to have an insight that something else can take its place that's even better. In other words, the world that God created can be attained. And I don't have to depend upon the one that I'm making at the moment. But I realize that is quite a choice. That's a real choice for me to have to make. It is about our peace, Brian, but it's even about more than that. It's about our loving. It's about a sense of joy. It's not just a serenity that allows me to step back, although at times, obviously, we all want to do that. But it's also about an enthusiastic sense of being joyful, which goes beyond even that. And that leads me to a sense of being and feeling completely loved and loving.
That means I gotta love the guy that's running the bulldozer, because he's me.
He's you.
Yeah.
But you see, we never see that he's you or me when he seems to be doing something different, doing something that would oppose us. That, my dear friends, that is what Jesus means in the Course when he says, you can see this differently. He means you can step back from all of that and not have to judge the situation that you're looking at, because what you really want to see differently is from the inside out. You want to see differently this sense of who you are. Not to change what you see out here. How do we get there? How do we get there? Now, if you know that's where you're trying to go, you've made the single biggest step that it takes to get there. Because now when you say, I want to see this differently, you've got a whole different perspective to come from.
Could you almost put it as in a situation like that, let us see this differently, bring them in.
Absolutely.
with you? And so it's more of a joining.
Yes, absolutely. You can't, the truth, the real truth of it is, you can't see differently by yourself. Why? Because you can't be by yourself. If I can't see differently with you, if I can't see differently for you, I can't see differently for me. Again, we're talking about some subtleties here, but I think you all understand why that is true.
So we're saying, help me see this, us differently, me differently, evoking love inside of my whole thing is love inside of myself.
Yes.
And so to allow that to be my teacher of, well, how much love do you have inside? Because I'm going to put this against you and let's see.
Yes.
And so
That's exactly what we're doing, honey. That's the movement that consciousness is going through now. We're having a flood of refugees across Europe. Why do you think that's happening? Why do you think, at first blush, 2 or 3 of the countries said, oh yes, we'll just open our borders and welcome, but they kept coming. They said, well, now wait a minute, we're not too sure we can handle all of this. What is the extent to which our love can be stretched? What is the extent to which we, as a consciousness, are willing to arrive at the moment that you and I, all of us sitting around this table, have just been talking about? To where we can all look inside and say, wait a minute, if we are ever to have a different world, then we have to see with different eyes. We should all recognize that the reason that it's so difficult to be open to hearing a call for love is because so much of the time we are not in a place where we are willing to give love. So when that seems to be really, really hard, I know I have to step back and say, whoop, you are so right though, Denny, that what it's about is not changing the world. It's about changing how we see ourselves. Would you, the two of you, would you allow us to help you? Then I would, if you are all willing, I would like to say that we just stand with you, not try to offer you any great words of wisdom, but just for you to know that for whatever comfort there is, we're here, we're with you. We hold you in a place of being totally safe, perfectly peaceful, and to hopefully remember that when things seem to want to crowd you a little bit. Thank you for sharing with us. I had another experience this just this morning, where after I had finished a lovely meditation and so forth, I was in having my breakfast and reading a Time magazine. And here was an article about Donald Trump and some litigation that he is currently going through, which I had never heard about. And I found myself thinking, my mind immediately just beginning to go to, my goodness, this man is running. What right does he have to run for president? On and on and on. And I thought, my goodness sakes. And I have the audacity to ask myself why it seems to be taking me so long to awaken. All of these things that we do, all of the things that we see, that terrorism, if I am fooled for a moment and I start allowing my mind to try to synthesize, let's say, or make sense of any of that that's happening, then I've lost track of the most important single thing that I have to learn. And that is the difference, to tell the difference between what is real and what is not real. What is the creation of God and what is my own imagination. To me, Sam, justice is forgiveness.
Yeah.
Justice is just exactly what we said a moment ago. It's looking at something and saying, wait a minute, this is not the creation of God. So the only just thing I can do is to forgive it, to see it differently. And if I start using the world's standards to apply to those things, it's going to go nowhere. Nowhere.
Well, justice is getting what you deserve, huh? So true justice would be forgiveness, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It would have to be. Where did your mind go when the first thought came, gee, it doesn't really matter, this is just an illusion? Was that kind of a write-off, a throwaway?
Yeah, that's where that.
It does, doesn't it? That's our tendency. But you see, the truth is, that's the only place to go. That's the only place that makes any sense. Because that's the only place where there is any truth. If you go there, then you can look at the person who is cutting the trees. And you can love them as much as your own daughter.
You see, to me, what's happening with the first part of what you were saying is you're trying to fix the illusion. You're trying to make it better. You're trying to justify it. But when you went to the idea, well, it's all an illusion anyway, that's what I'd like to be a default position. Like Brian says quite often, none of this is real. And this is from a place, I think, that I want to start operating. Now, I can't do it as an ego, though. I just have to have that knowing and then say, now, it's an illusion, but I don't know what it means. Can you show me how to operate within what seems to be an illusion? Because I don't know.
There's one thing you can do that will help you immensely, that helped me immensely. And that is, every time that thought, that I can go to that thought that this is not real, I ask myself, where were you when you couldn't love, and where are you now when you can? And the distinction between those two things is so profound. Because all of the things that I would try to live around or find ways to justify, they suddenly disappear. Because you simply, if you can just bring yourself to that point of saying, this is not a creation of God, and therefore it's just part of the world that I've made. And if it is not real, then there is nothing that keeps me from loving. Nothing. And look how you feel, look how free you can feel then. That changes everything. That takes it away from just being, oh well, it's just an illusion. No, no, no. It's not real, and therefore, I need no justification to love it. You have just decided, made one simple decision, and that is that you want to love. How you function and how you use this mind, wow, is entirely different. That's what Jesus means when he says on every page, would you like to see differently? Well, if you would like to see differently, simply tell yourself that what you want to see is how to love. If we were to develop the habit of always going to the God self for our solutions, pretty soon we're not going to have any more problems. It's only because we forget and most of the time still try to figure things out for ourselves. Well, you do that, of course, we got nothing but problems. So make it the habit to always go there for your solution. And pretty soon it's just like a metamorphosis. The mind stops looking for problems. I think the nicest, the neatest thing that I see happening and coming out of all of this is the awareness that there is only one consciousness in all of creation. Because that's ultimately where all of the scientific research is going to end up. Connecting the dots and seeing the connection. Well, when that happens, that will be what turns us loose to accept the reality of something that is totally not physical. But right now, everything that they're processing from the standpoint of the ego's perception in the reality of matter.
Like in the Bible, with the Hebrews, when they were in slavery in Egypt, and so when they wandered in the desert, to go to Israel, the generation that knew slavery wasn't allowed to enter.
But you see, honey, the only answer to that equation is that it wasn't real anyway. That's the only solution that ends up in a loving way. Everything else is going to play the role of guilt, of condemning what has happened, and now let's move on and make something new happen that we can eventually condemn. Somewhere, somehow, there will come a point, and it's just what we were talking about a moment ago. There will come a moment when you look in someone's eyes and you'll see nothing but love. And when you see that love, you recognize that it's them and it's you, and that's what connects us. And then everything else that stood in the way will just be gone.
And I happen to be reading a very interesting book right now called The End of Science. And the title itself actually addresses that particular question. The individual who wrote the book is steeped both in science and journalism. But what he did is he went all around the world and as to all the major disciplines like physics. Anyway, what he ended up with was that they disagreed profoundly with each other, and often and very angry all about it. And so, kind of where you end up with is they don't agree with each other.
But rather than seeing these things as a path that has gone astray, or somebody investigating something that is irrelevant, see every one of them as being on perfect course to lead us to the one truth that we all can accept. If we don't do that, then we're going to judge them all. And in the judgment of them, where are we?
Same place.
But if you see the perfect lesson 135, what could you not accept? If you but knew that everything, all events, past, present, and to come, are gently planned by one whose only interest is your good. Oh my goodness. And that must speak for the entire consciousness. So we can look at this and we say, oh, I see now. I see why this mass immigration of so-called refugees is happening. I can see where the benefit is going to arise from that. So there is a way to see everything in the context of the good that it serves for the consciousness as a whole. Not because one part is sacrificing, it's because that is serving for them the very, very highest and best good that is possible.
The path is always there.
The path, this is the irony of it, Sam.
Yeah.
The path is always there to point out one thing to us. There is no need for a path. It's the moment. It's what we think we have spent lifetimes achieving, but it's not. It's the one moment that we can allow ourselves to see an innocent, loving being. And then everything that we saw that didn't fit that pattern will fall away. I think the bottom line for me has always been to remember to go back to the God self. Most of the time, I am totally unaware of why anything is going on, even though I'm causing it. Totally unaware of what it is, what's making it happen. And to ask myself to watch the mind and so on and so forth is helpful because it recalls it to me that I am doing it. But the thing that really provides the help is to listen to my God self say, this is why you're doing it. And if you would like to stop, try this. Why do you think that you find it difficult? Maybe you don't, but most of us do. Why do you think you find it difficult to communicate, let's say, with people who have passed over? We're still using the projection of them as a receptacle for our own guilt. What if we didn't? What if all we wanted to do was to communicate to everyone, whether we're sitting here in this room or in our meditations or trying to communicate with people who have gone over? What if the only thing we wanted to communicate to someone was how much we loved them and how innocent they were? Do you think you might be able to reach out a little bit more?
Oh, yeah.
It's the only way.
With that kind of an attitude?
Would we have to protect our private thoughts then?
You wouldn't want to. You wouldn't want to because you are the ones you want to share. The private thoughts are the ones where you're thinking how beautiful somebody is and you just want them to know it. This whole subject of wanting to communicate a different message than I've ever wanted to communicate before came up to me about, it's come up periodically over the last 10 years. But the last time it was like it wouldn't let me alone until I really got into it. And the thought that comes into my mind is, where are you? Well, I'm right here. No, you're not right here. Right, what's here is the character that you have created for the story you're telling. And that's not you. You're not that character. Oh, okay. So where are you? Where are all of the other dreamers who are creating characters but are not the characters of the story they're telling either? Where are they? Well, ultimately, you can play this game, but you're going to go back until the only honest answer you can come up with is, well, they are the same place I am. If we're all one, if the mind of God is the only mind that is, then that must be where we are. Well, then, why can't I communicate? What is there that's keeping my mind in that little box?
A belief that we're separate. A belief that we're separate.
A belief that we're separate. But why do we believe? What makes the belief that we are separate a need?
A need.
A need. It's what Tom was talking about a moment ago. It's not having someone that I can project my guilt onto. There's a very interesting thing here that I think it's always helpful to remind ourselves of. Because as Tom said, that's what he wants. And yet we can sit here and we can read this and say, yes, that is what I want, but it seems to be too overwhelming. How can I really get there? Well, what we're trying to do when we make a statement like that is to deny the cause of our world. The only thing that ever comes to us, believe it or not, is what we want. Or, to phrase that another way, to say it comes to you because you think that's what you deserve. So, if I simply stood back and said, this is what I want, and let it go, I would have it. I wouldn't have to do anything else to attain it. It would come to me because that is the thought that makes my world. So don't be overwhelmed. Just be aware of what the cause of your world really is. I want to be loving. I want that to be the outcome of everything in my world. What can prevent that from happening? I mean, if that becomes my perception, and those are the thoughts that create my world, what can prevent that from happening? Nothing. Just me. Just me not having, you might call it faith or trust in the outcome, or belief that it is my thoughts that are creating my world. But nothing other than that.
It's like each morning I set my intention that I'm going to having a loving day. And that's what I've had.
Teddy, that's so perfect. Try the next time, if there's someone in your circle of friends that you periodically or on occasion have had difficulty with, and you are a little bit reticent when you are in contact with them. Try something just to satisfy yourself. Before the next time that you have contact, sit down and say, I am going to experience this person in a totally loving way, period. And watch what happens. Watch the outcome.
A previous mistake that happened 4 years ago is manifesting all over again.
Why do you suppose that is, honey?
Because so that I can heal and change my mind about it. Not because I've asked it to come to me and that because see, that's where I get very confused, because my ego says, well then what's wrong with me? And there's nothing wrong with me. I just have to see it differently.
Nothing comes to you unbidden, honey. Nothing comes to you, no lesson comes to you to be learned until
But
you
isn't
decide.
that what this is to say? Isn't that what this is saying? Is that, I mean, I feel like I'm seeing this all differently this time.
And so you finally decided that you're going to let it go. And so it's going to come back to you to give you that opportunity.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But you're the one that decided that now you were going to let it go.
Okay. Okay, that's what was not resonating with me. This is an opportunity for healing and blessing.
Yes.
The situation and the relationship that wants to be healed.
It's even more than that. that's when you'll really feel comfortable in claiming what's happening. But just go through it the way you're going through it. Embrace it, welcome it, see it as an opportunity, and keep asking.
Right.
What does this really mean for me? What is here for me to see? And you'll find in the final analysis, it'll be about a whole lot more than what you even think it is now.
Can it be in that moment, once you feel like you have an answer, what does this mean for me? Then you can also bring others that are involved, or not so much bring, but it just happens.
Yeah.
That they will,
I think so.
it will be a releasing
yes,
for them
that's-
also.
I believe that.
That's very wise to recognize that, Patty, because healing is never singular.
Right.
Yeah.
There's one thing that, in my mind, about Teresa's dilemma, and that is you did such a wonderful job before with the relative that wrote something on Facebook, and how you turned that around.
It's not turned around yet, though. It was in an instant, and it's not.
See, normally when that confusion happens, it's because the ego has made a judgment of what it thinks needs to be healed. And rarely is that ever going to be the case. So when you get confused, or when that does seem to be, well, wait a minute, how can this, what is this? Now you really know. You've got to go back to the God self and say, whoops, I've done it again. Show me. Show me what's really here. And the key sentence in there to all of that is to let yourself be absolved. Let yourself be forgiven. Don't try to engage the ego in the process. It'll always turn to sacrifice and junk. But go to the God self and say, I'm ready. Show me how. Do it for me. My willingness I bring. And that's all that's required. This is kind of a necessary transition point for all of us. Someday, particularly when you're really down, for reasons that might become more obvious later, sit down with yourself and watch what starts to come back to you. Because that's the question we all have to ultimately answer. That's what we are. You see, there isn't any way to ever find love until you realize that you are loved. And so asking yourself that question leads you to the answer, am I loved or not? Once the mind stops judging, everything that's in the mind becomes known. When we judge, all of the things that we have access to in our mind are limited to the parameters of what we judge. It's that easy. I mean, not that easy, that simple. But just someday, have a meditation when you're really feeling innocent, and then just sit there and watch what comes to your mind. I'm telling you, it's like opening a corral door to a wild horse, because the mind can just goes. Magic put in the hands of the God self can be very useful. It's not, I remember I used to think that if something was magic, I just automatically think, well, that's out of the, I don't want to have anything to do with that then. And that's not necessarily true. There's a classic story of one day Helen was in a department store and looking for a coat. And she looked and looked and looked and she was grousing, she couldn't find anything, and she'd been store to store to store. Finally, brother said, if you just walk over there to that rack, you'll see exactly the coat that you're after. She did, and she found the coat. Well, what could be more magic than that? Well, it became useful because it taught Helen to stay in touch with her guidance, regardless of what she thought it was for. And that's useful, that's helpful, because it teaches us to rely more on a different source of awareness than the ego's perception. So it's very helpful. We automatically presume that whatever we perceive is what's there. We just think if I see that, then that's what it is. That something is there. That is not the truth. Thoughts come into form, and we each give them the meaning that we give to our own self-perception, or the perception of ourself. So they're always going to be different. They're always going to be fluctuating. I have had circumstances or experiences that I would categorize, and that's what I was trying to think of, that I would categorize as a revelation. But they also came to me as a solution for a current problem. So I guess what I'm just trying to be clear about is that probably, most likely, anything that gets me out of the feeling that God is another entity and I can connect becomes a revelation. And what I use what is revealed for is kind of irrelevant. That doesn't matter. That doesn't make any difference at all, as a matter of fact. But just in my own mind trying to clarify. Well, I think the one thing that it does help me do is not to elevate the idea of a revelation to the point where I can't use it constantly. I don't have the feeling that a revelation should be something special. It should be a pretty ordinary type occurrence.
Is it like an insight or kind of an aha?
It's a knowing. It's a knowing. As Tom said, there are no words, there are no descriptions. It's a knowing, but it's a knowing that connects you to the whole mind.
Then do you see it as an aspect of knowledge with a capital K, which then brings
You could say that.
certainty?
You could say that.
Is that?
Isn't that interesting? That healing, and this isn't the only place, obviously, that he says this, that healing is accomplished by our being able to disavow our physical identification. Because when he's talking about that kind, he's talking about physical healing as well as healing the mind. So physical healing happens when you stop believing that you need to be physically healed. One creation of one Son is the only aspect of creation that ever occurred. What we don't understand yet is how that can manifest in so many different ways. We see it by identifying with each manifestation, instead of identifying with the one central manifestation of the thought of God. If I could identify myself as the thought of God, I would have to identify myself also or concurrently as you. So what is the thing that would seem to demand a distinction between me and you? It's only the idea, the concept, the belief that separation is possible. If I didn't have that belief, I wouldn't have trouble with that. I like to use the example of the body, where you can look at the body and say, that's a hand, that's a finger, that's a fingernail, oh, that's a leg, no, that's skin, no, that's hair, whoops, wait a minute. That's only because I'm looking at it from the standpoint or through the awareness of separateness. So I'm seeing separate things. But what if I looked at it from the standpoint of the body? What would I see? Every cell in the body has the same DNA. In other words, every cell in the body, whether it's a fingernail or a follicle of hair is exactly the same. In its nature, it is the same. And I know that, I can understand that when I'm looking at it from the standpoint of the body. See, I don't need to identify it as different. I'm just identifying it as another aspect of the body. The manual for teachers. And it's what is death? And it's quite illuminating. What is death? And one of the things that it talks about, which is something that I'm sure we're all familiar with, is how in order to preserve the illusion of the reality of death, we think of dying as just the body dying and the spirit going on. And he says that's just an excuse to try to hang on to the idea that death could be real, or that death should serve some purpose for us. But in truth, there's no reason for the body to die any more than anything else. In fact, the whole idea of death is what we're trying to come to the conclusion that we no longer need. Because even the idea of the body dying, if you think in your mind just a moment, the concept of death, anything dying, denies the reality of perpetual life. And of course, perpetual life is one of the things that the Course tries to teach us. So rather than seeing that or thinking of the body dying, let me read the last couple of sentences. And what is the end of death? Nothing but this, the realization that the Son of God is guiltless now and forever. Nothing but this. But do not let yourself forget, it is not less than this either. It sums up everything the Course talks to us about. The guiltless Son of God. Now we can begin to see the value of forgiveness, how forgiveness works into allowing ourselves to be free of the idea of the reality of the world, of the reality of the body. How great a challenge would that be? Not to judge anyone for anything. If God's Son is guiltless, then the whole idea of sin has to be a myth. But think for a moment. Think what that really means. Everything that we see in this world is an illustration that sin is real. You turn on the news and what do you see? The killing, all of the wars, people without homes. Where could God be in that kind of a world? God couldn't exist if that world were real. So, our job, as he says, just see the Son of God guiltless. But to do that, we have to recognize nothing in this world, nothing that we see that sin is the cause of, has any credibility. We have to completely step away from it. And I thought to myself, when I'm recognizing the reality of that, I thought to myself, my God, is that something anybody can do? Could anybody do that? And then immediately, what came to my mind was the image of Brother in the Sanhedrin, when he was sitting there and being judged. I mean, the full force of the ego's belief system was there, condemning him. And he turned to me and said, no one who is present in guilt's chamber that day, in judgment's chamber that day, thank you, is guilty. Not one is more holy than the rest. So he did it. He was able, face to face with his own judgment, to turn aside. Can you do it? I'm going to try. How hard is that to really accept? I mean, theoretically, sure. We've all read it probably several hundred times. Nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. Can you really believe that just because something that you believe that isn't real, it doesn't exist? How hard is that? But I'll tell you what, it's finally dawning on me. Until I do see it, until I do recognize it and accept it, I'm not going to go any farther than I am right now. Because that's the roadblock. And how would I live my life in this world if I did believe it?
Conscious. I want to connect all the connections, but just the fact that I'm in this body and I'm a human being on this planet, I feel like, that my natural tendency is for my ego to appear to be real.
Everything you say is perfectly true. And we can't expect anything more from the ego than that.
Yeah.
That's what the ego does.
Yeah.
That's what the ego is.
But it's just so hard. Really.
But we have an alternative. That's the part that we have to learn. The alternative is, even though we might have to do it 100 times a day, the alternative is going to the God Self. Everyone here has had the experience of choosing to see to go, as we say, go to the God Self, and experiencing your mind changing as a result of that. That's a real thing that we do. It's not a hypothetical thing, go to the God Self. That is a real place to go. And that's the alternative that Brother talks to us about throughout the Course. It's the one place where we know we can depend on, instead of having something be in contradiction or conflict with us, something there to support us. It's always hard for me to keep reminding myself that what he's speaking to here many times, the difference in levels, so to speak, is not the character that I think I am, not the character in my story, but he's talking to the real me, the me that's dreaming the story. So when he says, be you perfect, if I can absorb that from the standpoint of the one who is dreaming, it should help me to stop dreaming. That's always an interesting expression, if I might just interject here, that if you change your mind, you'll change your experience. There's two ways of thinking and seeing that, and two ways that it works. The first way is the ego's way, which is, yes, if you change your mind, you will change your experience. In other words, you'll make a different dream. You'll take a detour from this dream to a different dream. Most of the time we forget that what he's really trying to teach us here is to change our mind by giving over everything to the God Self, so that we don't need a detour in the dream. We can let go of the dream. Incidentally, if you're trying to make everything, if you get a feeling for everything being equal, try loving something. Try loving a group of people and making them unequal.
Making them unequal?
Try to love something and not feel the equality of your love. In other words, loving is what makes everything equal. Fear, you can fear one thing more than another. You can fear something and only be semi-afraid of something else, but love is all-encompassing. You know, one of the good practices that I've kind of forgotten about, but I used to do all the time, I would pick a meditation like maybe once or twice a week and make the theme of it be to recognize that everyone was innocent. And I would just ask for evidence of innocence to be brought to me. So I would spend a whole meditation just meditating on the feeling of what it was like to be in the presence of innocence. That's really kind of a fun thing to do. It is not an accident that he uses that word. We all have a real deep feeling of guilt, every one of us. And until we are able to see that the guilt has no real meaning, that it's not real, then there will continue to be a need for atonement. So it appeals to us and speaks to us, as Tom said earlier, from where we are right now. Once we have even just begun to acknowledge the possibility that sin is not real, then all of the baggage goes out of that word atonement. You'll be amazed. It's just, I used to struggle and fight with that constantly. And then I really began to consider that sin is not real, that this is my idea. And I can read that word now and there's nothing there. There's no charge in it at all. So, as I say, it's not an accident that he appeals to us in a way that we need to have done.
Yeah, well, with me personally, it has to do with growing up in Wheaton, Illinois, like it's evangelical headquarters of Billy Graham, and people telling me as like a 7-year-old, that I killed Christ.
It's funny you would say that, Denny, this morning in my meditation when I was going through that what is death, and then the forgiveness of see God's Son sinless and so forth. I had flashed in my memory, just like you were talking about now, a time when I was, I don't know how old, 7 or 8 years old, I was out playing football with a bunch of kids. We were all doing something, and I don't even know what happened, but somebody said something, and then one of the other kids looked at me and said, "Well, of course you're guilty." And when that thought came through my mind today, I thought, my goodness, that could have been the time in this lifetime when I was reminded that I felt guilty, because up until that time I never related to the idea of guilt. But after that, I made up for lost time.